Fight.
Welcome back to the Two Pointers podcast. I'm Trevor Everett. Before we get into today's episode with Matt Modderno of the Bleav in Wizards podcast and Bleav in DMV Hoops, he was incredible. I just want to say that out the gate. Thank you so much to Matt for the conversation today. Even if you don't care about the DMV, the Wizards, the new arena move, basketball in the DC area, you're really going to enjoy this. There's some unbelievable insight. Matt's one of the best to do it in the area and in general. Really appreciated his time. Looking forward to working with him again in the future. Just wanted to say that out at the top before we get into Matt's interview and conversation. Don't forget code 2Pointers. SeatGeek is the presenting sponsor of the Two Pointers podcast. $20 off that first purchase. SeatGeek.com, link in the top of the description. Gets you right into the app or on the website. Use code 2Pointers. Again, $20 off your first purchase. A lot of really great concerts, sporting events, basketball games, of course, throughout the winter here. Football playoff games are coming up, both college and the NFL. You'll have a really great opportunity to save some cash here, especially with the holidays. $20 off your first purchase. Code 2Pointers. Thank you again to Matt, and enjoy the episode. All right, as you heard in the intro, joining me today for the first time, and I'm going to get this right, I ask him phonetically, but host of the Bleav in Wizards podcast with former Wizard Jahadi White, which I think is really dope, and then the Bleav in DMV Hoops podcast. We're going to kind of mesh those together here. First time on the Two Pointers podcast, it's Matt Modderno. I got that right. I know I did.
Nailed it.
All his stuff is on the screen as well to be scrolling through the ticker if you're on YouTube. Links will be in the description for Matt. But thank you again for the opportunity to talk today. I greatly appreciate the time, especially with all the news and stuff flying around the DMV area. But introduce yourself first, and then I have some really great stuff I want to get into with you as somebody who I feel is a pretty strong expert in the area.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm looking forward to the convo. I respect the work you do too. So I think this is going to be a nice basketball convo for folks. Like you said, I mostly cover the Wizards and kind of local college basketball here. I think that's a recent thing. There's so many good basketball teams in the DMV this year. So I wanted to just give them a little extra love and coverage. And there's not kind of one place that's kind of covering the region as a whole. It's more kind of team specific things. So wanted to just kind of branch out a little bit here.
I think the Bleav in DMV Hoops does it. And obviously for those that have heard me talk before, a lot of basketball history. I did a series this offseason for house-enterprise.com around every state and I included the District of Columbia, of course, because it's hard to leave the history out there. But and I ranked all of the states based on basketball history, basically. And it was a 9-month project that I shouldn't have even thought to take on. But DeMatho played a really big part in the area, and it's something that I have a really strong pride in. People can read that. I'll put it below. But while we're here today, and first time, I'd love to have you back in the future to talk even more. But the Washington Wizards, for depending on who you ask, the right or the wrong reason, are in the news in the NBA. I want to lead with that because, again, I tell people all the time, I don't try to be an expert in the entire basketball United States, but this is a really big deal. For those who don't know, I'm just going to read you straight off of Front Office Sports what I kind of have so far, and then I just want to kind of get your thoughts on it. Make sure we leave plenty of room for the college basketball stuff. But this is straight out of Front Office Sports, of course. The dates and everything are still being lined up and all the money, but Washington Wizards, and unfortunately for Capitals fans, this is going to be based Wizards-centric conversation, but they're moving to Alexandria, or that's the plan at least. For now, in quotation marks, Monumental, I always get that wrong. Monumental, reading it right off the thing, is looking to relocate its headquarters to Alexandria. The new campus will house Monumental Sports Network studios and a new Wizards practice facility. Even before the move to Northern Virginia, approvals from the Virginia legislature and Alexandria City Council still need to be approved. This was as of December 13th. One source told Front Office Sports that the project will not even break ground until 2025. The project is expected to be completed in late 2028 should the proposal become finalized. So, long-winded there, but I just wanted to kind of give a little bit of context.
Yeah, sure.
Talk a little bit about what this move is, why you think it happened, and then just, we can save the frustration part for the end. But, as somebody who's local to the area, that covers the team.
I think really what's driving this is what drives most things, right? Is the money involved here. And the city of DC didn't want to pony up a ton of money to renovate their current arena, Capital One Arena, which is in downtown DC in the Gallery Place / Chinatown area. That's the metro stop it's off of. And the arena to me is fine. I mean, I've been to a decent number of NBA arenas. It's kind of middle of the road. It's not the Chase Center where the Warriors play, where it's state of the art or cutting edge, but it's okay. And I think you could probably refurbish that and have it on par with the vast majority of the league. But the city kind of, held the ownership, Capitals ownership group, Monumental Sports, at arm's length while they were trying to figure out their budget and things like that. And I think in the interim, Monumental just went and said, okay, well, you know what? If you can't guarantee us that we're going to get a decent amount of money that you're going to put toward arena renovations, we're going to move somewhere else, or at least we're going to consider somewhere else. And Virginia came to the table. They don't have a pro sports team at the moment. You've got the Nationals are in DC, the Commanders are in Maryland, and then you've got the Capitals and Wizards that are in downtown DC. So this was really their opportunity to come to the table and say, all right, like we could maybe steal them away. And they made them a pretty sweet offer. It's like, as you mentioned, in Alexandria, a section called Potomac Yard. So there's a smaller new Virginia Tech campus that's going to be there as well. And Amazon is right down the street, and they're building up some more kind of corporate headquarters and things like that. So it's an opportunity for them to put in sort of an entertainment center and have restaurants and shops and all other things they could potentially monetize. I think that's the way the NBA wants to go with a lot of these places, is to build up the area around the arena, and some of these ownership groups buy some of that real estate and things like that. And they kind of double dip on the profits that bringing an arena to that area makes. So the other nuance to this, you mentioned the practice arena. Basically, the city, the DC got together with Monumental Sports, who said we needed a new practice arena. They spent $65 million of city funding on renovating a site to give them a practice arena. It's also the area right now where their G League team, the Capital City Go-Go, and their WNBA team, the Mystics, play. And Monumental Sports put in like $6 million of that upfront, and that's their investment. And now they're walking away from that practice facility essentially with this move. So the city's put $60 million into renovating something that the team isn't actually going to make use of going forward. So I think that's one of the areas that fans have had a little bit of consternation with. If, hey, you wanted to build up and renovate this area, that was part of the pitch, and now you're really walking away from it. And I think that's part of the challenge here too, is the ownership group has said the right things of, hey, we can use this team to revitalize the area and things like that. And now it's like, well, actually, we could go make more money elsewhere. So let's go revitalize some part of Northern Virginia instead. And there is kind of like for folks not familiar with the region a whole lot, there is a little bit of rivalry between the two. So there's some bad blood or some mixed feelings about some of that, fallout that comes from moving the team over there. And we'll see. That's kind of the ramble on it so far to start out.
No, look, and I think you made a really great point about, without diving really deep into, some of the reasons for why in the past the arena was what it was supposed to be for Chinatown in that area. A little bit of insight for those that might not know it. You didn't touch on specific distance, but it's, as of for recording this, which is kind of hilarious, near 5 o'clock traffic time.
Yep.
It's a 7.8 mile trek. I just put in Alexandria to Washington, D.C. in the map, which is a 30-minute trek, which doesn't sound like a lot, but take yourself out of it for a second, because I know how you feel about it. I mean, people can see it on Twitter as well. We'll get into that in just a second. But what was the general fan reaction when this news broke in the area?
I would say fairly split. Seems to be like my small echo chamber of people's reactions. I think folks that live in Virginia are saying, we've had to trek in DC, so you should have to come our way for a change, and we don't want to hear your complaints about it. And then folks on the Maryland and DC side have said, well, that makes it tougher for us, and it's not the area we're used to, so that's worse. So I think really it kind of just depends on where you are. I do think almost everybody involved could probably agree that both sides could handle this better. And by both sides, I mean the Wizards and Capitals ownership group and DC government. Realistically, it seems like DC government didn't really know that Monumental was shopping their services to other parties, and maybe they don't have the right to expect that kind of information up front, but they also didn't really prioritize this either. And if it's such a big revenue generator for the city, maybe it should have been a little higher on their priority list too.
So talk to me a little bit about, as somebody who I have been to the area enough, and I have had some family that lived in Alexandria for a long time and then moved and then came back and yada, yada, yada. So I've been in the area enough to know, and this is kind of where I'm going to kind of get your personal touch on what's happening here. And then we'll get to some positive stuff as well, because I think there is a brighter end at the end of the tunnel. But Alexandria is not exactly the most fun area when it comes to traffic. And when you're going to add, let's just go with Capital One Arena right now has 20,600 seats. I don't know if I've seen an exact number of what this is supposed to look like, hold, whatever. But let's just say 20,600 people for a sellout show up to Alexandria, Virginia. Tie this in now to what you feel about the situation, at least what you've shared so far publicly. How is this going to negatively affect what the perception of just that game day environment and area is going to be?
Yeah, it's funny. This is another one where people are kind of conflicted. I've seen a lot of like, well, it's DC/Virginia. There's always traffic. So what's the difference? And I think the difference is there's a certain amount of traffic when you're getting to a facility that was zoned for and planned for this level of traffic coming in, and they built up infrastructure upgrades over a 10-year period to account for that. Now we're shoehorning a 20,000 person facility into an area that wasn't really set up to accommodate that. And there are residential side streets and things like that you're going to have to go through to get there. And are those people going to be inconvenienced by 82 nights a year where there are teams, but also events and concert and all kinds of things like that? It just seems like a lot to throw at people. And now you're redirecting traffic to an area that probably wasn't built to accommodate it. You mentioned that it's like about 7 miles away, and that doesn't seem like it should be a lot. I made that drive the other day after work, just coincidentally pretty close from one side to the other. And it was almost a 40-minute drive, about 5:30 at night. So that sounds crazy, but that's what we're looking at right now. So now you've put all these people in parking that's not built for it. Maybe they've not zoned, but maybe they've done enough city planning or urban planning to figure those things out as a part of this existing project that they're kind of piggybacking off of. I don't know without insight to that, though. Just knowing, working for the government and things like that, that's not really there's not too much foresight that typically goes into these things. So I think this is going to be just something they really, really have to do all their homework on and due diligence on over the next 4 or 5 years to make that work. And you mentioned not breaking ground until 2025. That's probably good. Hopefully that is a full year and a half that's spent figuring out exactly what that would look like. And the other challenge here is, I guess it's been reported that they didn't tell Metro, our public transportation system, in advance that they were even considering this. And Metro is at a huge budget deficit. People that, it's built on government workers and things like that who aren't coming downtown as much anymore. So that whole system isn't getting the same, revenue that they used to. They're talking about shutting down the least used metro stations, of which Potomac Yard, where this facility would be, is one of them. So, obviously that probably can't happen long term. And maybe if it's shut down in the interim, you can use it to really beef up what that can take. But some of these smaller metro stations, it's sort of one, single platform in the middle, and it's pretty tightly packed, and you're not built to have 20,000 people in there. Gallery Place is huge. It's multiple levels. It's 2 sides. So, it's meant to accommodate that. And I don't know. It's just a lot of logistics that they're going to have to work out. If they can do all those things, great. I don't see how they can do that smoothly in this kind of short a time frame. It's like I said, shoehorning is a lot of what I think it is probably the best way to depict it, because it's just, well, it seems like we could kind of do it. So let's see if we can throw this in here without a lot of pre-planning. And that just makes me nervous as a fan that the game day experience is going to be a lot tougher.
I think the Metro point is really interesting. And look, I'd be lying if I said I was a expert on infrastructure and how this stuff is supposed to work, right? But look, as someone who's made the trip up there many times, both for personal and just otherwise reasons, that railway system and that just the ability to get around, even if it isn't always perfect and convenient, right? It's one of the most convenient ones in the area, and or at least the ones I've experienced in the area. But to touch on the basketball side of things, we've never talked about this publicly, or maybe even privately at this point, but to kind of land the plane on the basketball part of the Wizards stuff before we get into some of the college. So we've never talked about the Wizards before, and really thinking about where in my lifetime, the Wizards have always just kind of either, obviously having John Wall, most of that, they've been competitive, right? Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden it was like, they're never going to actually sell Bradley Beal off to the world and just finally do it, right? And finally just go into the rebuild and jump head first. Is the timing and kind of, it's a 2-part question. Talk to me about do you think that, was there a sigh of relief when the Wizards finally just said, we're in for the long haul now and in for a rebuild, whether you want to call it that or not. And then does this timeline, whether we have to assume that 2028 is a really long time from now, but when you really say the number out loud, it's only 4 years from now. And we've seen what other teams like the Thunder have done in that time frame.
Mm.
Is this timing up perfectly, or do you think just based on the way management has done these things, is this a happy accident?
It's a really interesting question. And I think you've had an owner that's very publicly come out and said, we will never, ever tank. That's been such a popular quote. We sold t-shirts that said that with a tank on it, so it's a pretty integral part of the fan experience with the Wizards of, hey, we'll just compete for the play-in spots every couple of years and that'll be our championship. And it just was long overdue, I think, for most fans' perspective. Like if your team tops out as an 8 seed, like is that really worth doing? You hear a lot of times in sports that's the worst place you can be. You either want to be top or bottom. Being stuck perpetually in the middle is just really kind of fool's errand long term. So I think most fans were happy. I think most people probably agreed it came about 2 years too late. Realistically, they didn't get much for Beal, given the no contract or no trade clause situation in his contract. Maybe those pick swaps, if he never plays for Phoenix, look pretty good in a couple years. But ultimately, you probably could have gotten multiple firsts for him. So most people probably would have preferred it come 2 years earlier or something like that. But it's a better late than never kind of deal. And off to a good start from a rebuild perspective. We seem to have locked ourselves into a top 5 pick. So that's pretty much what Wizards fans have to look forward to for the rest of the year. Here is the development of rookie Bilal Coulibaly, and we'll see what that looks like. To your kind of bigger question there of, is the timeline gonna mash up pretty well? It's a good one, because I think it's not really be good by 2028. It's really be good by 2026. If you look at what like the Clippers are trying to do with their new stadium, selling out those luxury boxes, getting multi-year commitments in advance, it really is a multiple years in advance kind of situation. So I think realistically, we're talking by 2026 is the clock. And I'm not saying they have to build a championship contender, from nothing in the next 3 years, but you've got to have enough to interest people in the long-term direction of the team. So it's multiple young, like exciting pieces, like where the Thunder are at now. Honestly, they're probably better. It's maybe where the Thunder were at last year, of something to build enough excitement to sell corporate sponsorships. And can Amazon buy out one of these big, hundreds of thousands of dollar luxury boxes for a 3-year commitment? All that kind of stuff is really what's going to drive them. And I think that's tough, because now you've put a ticking clock on your rebuild. Like, if we're not good in 3 years, are we going to rush this thing to accelerate that? And 3 years is like, nobody really wants to be bad for 3 years, but sometimes that's just what it takes. So the Thunder have kind of done that in like a 3-4 year window realistically. And they had a lot of assets to work with, though. You're the Wizards. You didn't get much for Beal. You didn't get much for Porzingis. So the cupboard is really bare. So you have to get these draft picks right. You have to be in a situation where your contracts expire in a time that you could go out and get big free agents. And it just, I think it makes their job a little bit tougher. So we'll see if they're able to kind of thread the needle, though.
Yeah, and look, coming full circle before I make hopefully a seamless transition into the college part of this conversation, but like, I mean, you're going to have to not only sell to those corporate sponsors and those boxes, but it's as simple as like, I mean, I live 45 minutes from the Carolina Hurricanes here in the Triangle area of North Carolina, and the whole point of me bringing that up is I'm a really hard season ticket sell, because that's a commute that, I mean, granted, it sounds longer than whatever. It's like 34 miles to go 39 minutes or whatever it is, right? And, we'd established already what that commute's going to look like. And it's going to be really hard for a family to say, like, it's a commitment now for us to go and make that trek for a Tuesday night game against the Timberwolves. Like, I know they're good now, but I'm just throwing out any team in the West that like isn't going to draw a fan base across the country into the capital. So, speaking of the capital, I was trying to figure out a way to land the plane on that, but let's tie into the college conversation a little bit for one of the tenets of Capital One Arena, and that's Georgetown. And I guess immediately when I first heard this, before I even started looking at what you had wrote, said, spoke, or anybody else around this area, is this detrimental to the program? Like, is this something that could kill the Georgetown program in the short term?
The move, I don't think it honestly impacts them a ton, to be quite honest. Their arena So they play Capital One Arena, the same place where the Wizards and Capitals play now, for folks not familiar with that. And that's been a real challenge for them. Those games are empty. When they're not good, they're getting 1,000, 2,000 people in there. I think I've tweeted out some pictures of games where it's been me and 150 of my closest friends at an afternoon game on a Saturday against, a local low major team. And that's really going to be the big challenge for Ed Cooley and company, is to build enough of a winner. If you build a good team in this area, people will come. And if not, there's enough other things to do that people won't. And I know that sounds kind of fickle, but that's really where they're at. Like even the student section is pretty dead at this point when they're not very good. There's a little more excitement now than last year under Patrick Ewing when they were kind of dead in the water. But it's just going to be really interesting to see if they can find ways to get people there, or if this kind of necessitates them building an on-campus arena, at least of some size. I think people have talked about that for, I don't know, as long as I've been watching sports in the area, of that being a thing that they have to talk about. There's a project in the early 2000s to see if they could do that and raise money for it and where they'd put it. And it's not like a Villanova situation where there's room on campus. They're kind of tight, and it would be a big deal for them, and repurposing some land and things like that to put that in. Does Capital One Arena fall into disarray because these other teams have moved? Maybe, maybe not. I think Ted Leonsis, that owns the Wizards and Capitals, still owns that building, so he'll want to keep making money off of that. If anything, I would think it maybe just forces Georgetown to figure out some other options. And it's just not fun to go to one of their games and see nobody there. And the security in the arena is really weird. If you have an upper deck ticket, they don't let you move down. You'd think you'd want to fill the lower bowl. So it's just a bad environment. So I think, if anything, this might actually force them to do something about it. And maybe that helps them.
I was more insinuating that than anything, because the numbers back up basically everything that you said about the uncertainty there. According to the Georgetown Statistics website. This is the only place I could find that was remotely reliable on statistics. For context, for those who don't realize, now that you've said it, they play in Capital One Arena. They have the fifth largest arena in Division I, 20,600 seats, as we established. Yep. As of right now, and I'm still trying to figure out if I believe this, 6,473 people have on average attended a game this year, is what it's saying.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder how much of that is we sell these tickets to season ticket holders and things like that. Like I have a friend that's a season ticket holder, has 3 tickets, and he's been one time so far this year. Do those count toward those statistics? I don't know. I've used his tickets more times than he has. So do with that what you will. Point. But like when they played American, they lost to American last year. So it was kind of a revenge game of sorts.
Yeah.
I promise you there were not 2,000 people in that arena on a Saturday afternoon. Like I guarantee that.
Okay. So kind of pivoting into something else, because again, I don't want to get into the detriment of the program. Like as a college basketball fan and historian myself, I care. Like I miss the old Big East. I miss I just miss the history of the area. Like I want Georgetown to be good. It's more fun when Georgetown's good, and they don't affect my everyday college basketball fandom. So I guess, I don't know if this is going to be a rapid fire scenario here, but were you surprised by the lack of success under Patrick Ewing?
No, I think NBA teams.
Like how easy that was. You're like, nope.
I mean, NBA teams aren't stupid, right? Like if this is a guy that got passed over for that many jobs, maybe there was something missing there that they saw. And there just aren't a ton of these former players that have come in and had a ton of success at the college level. So I think that's part of it as well. Is Penny Hardaway the best of the former NBA guys that are coaching right now? And like, maybe you could say Juwan, maybe it's him, but there's just as many, if not more.
Definitely not Juwan. I would probably lean Penny, but I'm looking at the top 25 in my head without pulling it up, and it's probably Penny.
Yeah, I mean, he's the best one I can think of, and you've got Chris Mullin flamed out. You've got now Patrick Ewing that flamed out. Like there's Mike Woodson is maybe like third on the list, and Indiana is really not very good in my opinion. So it's just the track record isn't great, and I think that's it's just a different, like you've got to like live and breathe this stuff to be a successful college coach, I think, and those guys just haven't had to do that when you've made millions of dollars doing something, and now this is like your semi-retirement job. It's a different story, and so I wasn't surprised by that. I mean, I think it was a lot worse than anyone could have expected, but Yeah, that had to be a change. Honestly, it should have happened probably 2 or 3 years earlier, but them sneaking in and winning that Big East tournament kept him around a little bit longer than maybe was in anybody's best interest.
Thank you for bringing that up, by the way, because one of us or both of us was going to be put on a stake for not bringing that up. Because like, oh, would they at least made it? It's like I don't want to hear it. I will throw out one guy that we forgot. So again, I don't want to be burned on a stake for my affiliation to Tobacco Road, but Hubert Davis is probably a good shout as a former NBA guy.
Sure.
He had a really strong career in New York. I can't. I'm sitting here looking at the top 25 going, let me bring that up so I don't get aggregated poorly for that. So
aren't we sure Hubert Davis is that good of a college basketball coach yet? Question mark.
Yeah, number 11 in the country. I know they just lost to Kentucky. I have to, only because of what they're currently doing, and I'm very grateful that he's been given time.
Sure, Tim.
So far, yes. I will stay in the minority on that. I think
after 3 years, people would have said the same thing about Juwan. So.
Yep.
How has that really worked out too? So I'm just saying, like, I'm not wishing failure on him. It's just I think he's a too early to tell candidate right now. I think it'll be better, and they're kind of a more well-oiled machine than somebody like Georgetown was. Georgetown was on the way down by the time Patrick Ewing took over there, so it's a little bit of a tougher job. But it just there aren't a ton of guys that you can look to and say, oh yeah, this is a great model.
All right, so I got a couple because I know that you have to get on to however far a drive to College Park is, and they're actually going to be brought up here in a second. So, but biggest surprise from a DMV area program this year, whether that's good or bad in your opinion?
So this is another thing for people not in the area that is like a weird distinction of what really is the DMV. I think honestly, it would make sense to think DC everywhere in Maryland and everywhere in Virginia. Those are the three things. That's what people from outside the area would expect. And for the purposes of our podcast, that's really what we've included, just because it's better to talk about some of these teams on the outer edges, and people that kind of blend the lines between multiple regions can talk and appreciate about.
It's more fun for you when James Madison is the top 25 team. It just is.
Exactly right. So that helps for us a lot. I think if you ask people locally, if your part of the city area doesn't touch a metro stop, you're probably not the DMV. So that's really
interesting.
The western part of Maryland closest to DC and Northern Virginia are things that people would really call the DMV, and then obviously DC itself. So those programs are probably Maryland, Georgetown, George Washington, George Mason, American. I'm sure I'm forgetting one team here somewhere in this, but
Howard's another one.
Howard, yeah, thank you. I'm a big fan of this Howard team, so
me too.
I omitted them, but
picked them to win the MEAC again. So I think
that's smart
proud
money
so far. But I've also seen Morgan State play yesterday in a loss despite, and then also which again I like you talked about. We won't go through the whole list, but Virginia alone has over 10 schools themselves. Maryland has roughly. I'm just looking right off the page without counting them. There's basically 20-ish schools if you were to if you were to draw the lines out. Morgan State, North Carolina Central, the MEAC's going to be really fun. That was kind of my point there. But
no, I'm glad you brought that up, because I'm glad you reminded me on Howard, because I think they're actually a really fun team to watch. I've seen them play live 3 times. They gave Cincinnati all they could handle, and it's a decent Cincinnati team. So I think they're actually going to be a team that will get into the tournament and could win a game, because they're big and physical, and they've got a lot of dudes. So depth is a huge thing for a team like that. To be honest with you, though, I think let's just anybody from the DMV, excuse me for saying this, but let's count James Madison. Had their coach Mark Byington on our podcast before the year, and he seemed like a pretty straightforward dude. And he was like, yeah, I think we're going to be pretty good. Like, I mean, it was coach speak, but also you could tell like he was feeling pretty good about things. And I think some people have pointed at metrics and things like that of like, well, they played Michigan State, and Michigan State is not really that good. So does that win mean that much? But anytime you're undefeated this far into the season, regardless of strength of schedule, you're a darn good team. And Terrence Edwards is really, really good, and they guard the hell out of everybody. And I would not want to play them in the first round of the tournament if I were a Power 5 team.
It might be a Power 5 team. It might be a little bit higher of a seed than I think people realize. So,
yeah.
All right, I guess I'll answer myself on this one a little bit. On the bad side of things, Maryland struggled. And like I told you before we started, that like as a kid growing up, I was taught to hate Maryland. And like whether I'm an adult now and make my own decisions, I don't sports hate really anybody anymore, especially doing it, to this manner as a career.
Sure.
But other than the 3-point shooting, because I could ask anybody who's at any point ever seen this team play or covered them in any way, other than the 3-point shooting, what do you feel like? And I guess the whole point of this was they have been a surprise on the bad end of things, but
Mhm.
is there a factor that is contributing to their struggles that's not the 3-point shooting? That's just glaringly obvious that people aren't seeing.
Yeah, I think people underestimated contributions from other veterans that left in the offseason, myself included. This was, as a Maryland alum, this is the most excited I've been about this, like a Maryland team in since I graduated in 2010. So that should tell you something. And that's very much not gone the way I would have expected. Everybody was over Mark Turgeon. So Kevin Willard era started off really well, surprised everybody last year. Naturally, you'd expect an improvement on that. And honestly, we just haven't gotten much from those two freshmen. I think the coaching staff was really under the impression that Deshaun Harris-Smith and Jamie Kaiser, their two marquee freshmen, would come in and be like instant college, impact players. And Kaiser can't shoot other than, stand still, catch and shoots, and he doesn't really do a whole lot else thus far. And Deshaun Harris-Smith can't do anything other than drive, but since he can't shoot, nobody plays him for the jumper. So it's just they've really struggled to get much out of those guys, and you're really left with Jameer Young and Julian Reese. And I think everybody thought we'd get back to Dante Scott from a couple years ago that shot 40% from three, and he's just been bad. Like, I don't think there's any other way to put that. I went down to Asheville to watch them play in the Asheville Championship, and they lost to both Davidson and UAB, and he honestly kind of lost them the Davidson game at the end. He told one of his younger teammates to switch with him on a play at the end of the game, and then didn't actually switch and stood in the middle of the court while someone hit a game-winning three. So you've got a fifth-year veteran power forward who's supposed to be one of the leaders of your team, and it doesn't seem like he's really meshed with the other veteran guys on the team. Jameer Young and Julian Reese are really tight. Dante Scott is not. And when you have a coaching staff that seems indifferent to whether a fifth-year player comes back in the offseason, that probably tells you all you need to know about how valuable they really thought that player was going to be. You've got Hakeem Hart, who left, who was probably your third best player last year, and he's the eighth best man on Villanova this year. Ian Martinez was a surprise to them. He left like literally at the last minute as the portal closed to go to Utah State, and just saw him in person at Santa Clara the other day where he put up 30 points basically and looks amazing. He shoots it, he defends, and he's super athletic, and that's something they could have needed and really could have used on this team. Your impact transfer, Jordan Geronimo, senior guy coming out of Indiana, and every year, everybody at Indiana thought, well, maybe this is the year Geronimo breaks out. And maybe we're just at the point where that never happens, but he's basically a 6'6" power forward who's super athletic and can't really shoot. He's a glue guy on a team that needs him to be more than a glue guy. So I could probably do another half hour on why Maryland has struggled. I think those are the major reasons of they lost guys that were impact players and they didn't really replace them with anybody valuable. The one shooter they brought in, Chance Stevens, I want to say tore an MCL and is still out, probably misses the whole year. When you're relying on one guy that averaged 6 points a game at Loyola Marymount to be your 3-point shooter, that's really tough, and it's a lot to ask of him. They brought in Matty Traore, who is years away from being years away probably. So it's going to be a rough year. Like, I don't see it getting better. I just don't know how they score.
I like you could definitely tell that you don't just talk about college basketball, because that was definitely an NBA, definitely some NBA vocabulary there with the years away thing. I guess really quick on Maryland, I have one more thing after that, we'll get out of here. So at least look, from what I've watched vaguely, I talked about 3-point shooting, but the defense is still really legit, and a lot of the KenPom stuff backs that up. I mean, they're 20th in adjusted efficiency on defense. They're top 50 in effective field goal percentage, turnover percentage. They're 17th in the country. They're the worst 3-point shooting team according to KenPom right now. So look, there's a lot of really great things there on one side of the ball, not the other. As it stands right now, are they in the tournament in any fashion in March?
Yeah, I don't think so, unless they go on some kind of crazy run here. They did nothing in the non-conference. All their wins are against just, sub 200 KenPom teams, I think, for the most part. It's just not really much to look at and be impressed with resume-wise if they can knock off Purdue. And the problem is the Big Ten as a whole, I don't know that it's actually that good. So do you really have that many opportunities for kind of marquee wins to save your year? That the whole conference is beat up on each other because it's all kind of packed in the middle. Like, I'm not saying they won't win any games. I just don't think they can win enough to kind of get themselves out of this rut. And to your point, the defense is really good. They've struggled thus far to turn that into offense. they were asking Gary Williams about it recently. What would you do if you coached this team? And he said, well, if I can't shoot threes, I'd tell my guys to stop shooting threes, and I'd take more twos if I had to. And you can only pound the ball inside to Julian Reese so much. He struggles with foul trouble and things like that. So I don't see how they fix this.
Their best, for those that, just to show how knowledgeable you are on the subject, their best win was an overtime win against Penn State, who was 109th in KenPom. No other victory below 109. So 80 lost to Indiana, 111 Davidson, 169 UAB, and 28 Villanova. So, all right. Again, I told you earlier, I like the history of the area, and I'm going to kind of end with a history, and it'll kind of lead into what's going on in one of the programs now. So after 2 years and 2 20-win seasons, I have to kind of set this one up so it makes sense. Under Kim English, for those that don't know, how cool is it for George Mason to have Tony Skinn at the helm with 8-2 record? And for those that don't know, this is the point I wanted to throw in there. Skinn was a starter on the 2006 Final Four team. So how cool is it just to see? And there's really nothing I want out of this question or answer. It's really awesome to see they're 8-2. How does it feel?
It's great, not just because Tony has that history with the program. It's great because everybody around here likes Tony Skinn, and he's a guy that just has like deep ties to the area. And all these guys that they bring in, they brought in great transfers. They all knew Tony from his time recruiting the area for other teams. Previous stop at Ohio State before being at Maryland, and he's just a guy that like people want to see do well, and I think that'll help him a long time. He's got existing relationships with all the really good AAU teams and high school teams in the area. So I think they're definitely on the way up. And by the way, he's just like a good X's and O's coach so far. You learn from the Jim Larenegas of the world, as a player, and he's been under really good coaches as an assistant. So I think the pedigree is there. And if you can get players and you're a good coach, you're going to go a long way. So he's one of the guys that I most enjoyed talking to, kind of our local preseason coverage here. We did supposed to do a half hour with him. He ended up talking for like 85 minutes. Just nice dude to just sit and talk basketball with, and just seems like a really good guy. So I'm very happy for them just from that perspective. All
right. Well, again, thank you for you gave me more time. You didn't give me 85 minutes. I didn't ask for 85 minutes, and I definitely didn't want to do that. If you want. That drive to South, I almost said South Park. That drive to College Park is obviously not going to be very easy. So, obviously, for game coverage tonight, they'll be playing Nicholls State, if I got that right. And then for all the other work for yourself, let people know where they can find you, any work you're doing, and it'll all be in the description below as well.
If you're cool, I just want to throw one plug out. The other nice thing about these DMV teams on the way up is there's a lot of really good coaches that are on the upswing here. George Washington has Chris Caputo that came from Miami, and they're really fun to watch also. They've got one of the best stories in college basketball, a guy named Garrett Johnson. Garrett missed basically the last 2 years of college basketball because of a 9-inch tumor in his hip. He went through multiple rounds of chemo, multiple rounds of surgery, and he's averaging like 18 and 8 so far this year as technically a 21-year-old freshman. So just really cool to see him out there playing, and they're a cool team to watch. Americans on the way up with Dwayne Simpkins, who was a Maryland alum under Gary Williams, and he's made them kind of fun and competitive. And then Kenny Blakeney, a Duke alum, as the head coach at Howard. I think they're definitely on the way up too. So it's like you'll be hearing more about kind of these DMV programs the next couple of years, I think, because this is year 1 and 2 for most of these guys, and they're already a lot better than they were when they took over. So should be a lot of fun. As for our podcast, it's the Bleav, BLEAV, in DMV Hoops. It's a part of the Bleav Podcast Network. Also, Bleav in Wizards. That's myself, as you mentioned, and Jahadi White. That played for the Wizards for about 5 years, played in the NBA for 7 years, so provides player perspective on everything. Honestly, we talk about more than just the Wizards and, what this player would do in this situation, or what's really going on in that locker room, or what do you think this coach is telling a Jordan Poole as he's throwing up 35-foot heaves for no reason. So just trying to talk through what we're seeing on the court and break it down. And, just did a podcast today with George Mason's power forward, Woody Newton, who's from the area and transferred a bunch of times, and really nice, fun guy, good listen. And I'm just excited for everybody with their program too.
Well, look, I love the shout out to all the college basketball programs in the area. I greatly appreciate the time again, and for everything for you will be all linked in the description below. Feel free to go check out all the interviews you talked about. The George Washington stuff I did check out. It was really, really cool stuff. So, again, thank you for the time. I look forward to talking to you again.
Anytime.